After nearly 2 years of campaigning, it's finally here. We're talking caucus with Democrats and Republicans. That's today on Nevada Week.
Support for Nevada Week is provided by Senator William H. Hernstadt, Cashman Equipment, and additional supporting sponsors.
On February 22nd, Nevada voters will be first in the West to head to caucus. Democrats will be casting their votes for one of 12 candidates still in the running. Republicans have opted out of the caucus and have instead put all their support behind President Trump. Today on Nevada Week, we're informing voters about what's new to the Democratic process and what they need to know before they head to their caucus site. Plus, we'll dive into the strategy behind the Republican decision. Joining us for this discussion is Alana Mounts, Executive Director of the Nevada State Democratic Party, Andrew Thomas, Political Director of the Clark County Republican Party, and Megan Messerly, reporter for the Nevada Independent. Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. As we said in the intro, we're almost upon caucus time. It's very exciting. I want to talk about, first off, Andrew, we mentioned this in the intro, we're first in the West. Why is that so important to Nevada?
In contentious years, it really shows where the electorate's at and really gives a good sense of what voters in the American Southwest have to look forward to. I think that this year is a little less important, at least in Republican politics, just because we've known where our nomination is going for quite some time now.
Yeah. How about nationally, Alana? Why is it so important to our nation to be third?
Yeah, well, Nevada plays such a decisive role in our nomination calendar for a couple of reasons. One, because of our diversity, and because we're a battleground state. Unlike Iowa and New Hampshire, we have 1/3 of our population is Latino. 14% of Nevada households are union households. We have one of the fastest growing API populations in the country. When Nevadans make their choice on February 22nd, they're going to pick a nominee who can win in a general election because our electorate looks like the rest of the country. And so that nominee is going to be able to beat Donald Trump in November.
Megan, let's talk about this. We have been considered a regional bellwether in the past. I was looking back at our history, and actually we've done a good job of predicting presidential candidates up until we've become maybe third in the West. What has our record been since we've had that third in the West, or third in the nation position?
Yeah, we've done a really interesting job, I think, of not only electing candidates or voting for candidates that have then gone on to win the nomination, but also, we've tend to, the way that Nevada votes tends to be the way the nation goes. That has not always been the case. Like most recently in 2016, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton won the state. Obviously, President Donald Trump won the elections. That's not always been true. But in general, we do tend to be a good gauge of, the way the country votes. Like Alana was saying, we're a diverse state. We have labor, we have left, we have right, we have urban, we have rural. So we have a lot of different segments of the population that really speak, I think, to the country as a whole.
Now, the caucus is something that is steeped in U.S. history. It's something that goes back to really the founding of our country. Now we only have 6 states that are still caucusing for the presidential election, at least. And really only a handful of those are doing kind of more of a traditional caucus. Why is Nevada still a caucus state?
Yeah, well, I think Alana would have something to say about that too, but thinking about the way that Nevada is, right, we have a lot of folks who I think really like being engaged in the political process. I talk to voters at events that are excited about the prospect of showing up and being able to talk to their neighbors and debate issues, right, and be able to discuss their party platforms and the way they think the country's going. I think specifically looking at the Democratic side, the Democratic Party has talked a lot about, bringing more voters into the fold. They have same-day voter registration at the caucus, and it's a way of expanding the party as well, and bringing folks into the fold. So I think that's why there's been such an emphasis on the caucus process here in Nevada and a persistence of it, even as we've seen other states move away from it.
And Alana, on the Democratic side, why is it so important then?
Yeah, Megan is exactly right. It's a party building opportunity for us, but taking a step back, we've been a caucus state for decades, and in 2008 we became first in the West. And even then in 2008 we expanded our caucus to have workplace caucus sites on the Las Vegas Strip. Fast forward to 2020, we are continuing to expand our process. We have Caucus Day on the 22nd, but we also have early voting on February 15th to the 18th. We're the only caucus state in the country offering that option. because we believe this caucus needs to be accessible, it needs to be transparent, and it needs to be expansive for voters. And that option is an addition that I think is going to help open it up for more people to make their voice be heard.
On the Republican side, is this something that should be continued in our state?
Look, I think that for Republicans in the state of Nevada, we're trying something new and we're trying to be a little more innovative, because one of the things that we have nationally going for us is that there is quite a lot of momentum for the president right now. You're talking that the president has built out a re-election machine like we've never seen before. I mean, coming from 16, where his efforts were not as large and not as organized as, quite honestly, the opposition, that has entirely shifted. So the thinking is now, how do we bypass as many obstacles as possible? And we're trying to get to the point that we can start focusing on down ballot races. So as far as looking at a caucus, I mean, in a contentious year, we're going to go back to a more traditional system, but this year is just, there's really no need for us.
Is that the main reason then that the Nevada GOP has decided not to have a caucus this year?
A big part of that was to make sure that we could start party building at a local level. I mean, one of the failures that we had in 16 and 18 is that the local Republican parties were not performing and not assisting our candidates in the way that we needed to, and that's a big emphasis that we're looking at now. So we want to make sure that we're really shoring up our grassroots at the down ballot level and making sure that, you know, we're assisting the president where we can, but our priority is making sure that all these races that, you know, we let slip by the wayside just because we were not organized as a party, that's going to stop.
Now, Alana mentioned that having a caucus brings a lot more engagement, voter engagement, but also opportunity to register voters too. So is this a drawback for the Republican Party here in Nevada for that?
Absolutely not. We have seen no shortage of enthusiasm for particularly the president's reelect, and really that has helped at every single level.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about just the accuracy of a caucus too. We're kind of balancing some pros and cons, Alana. We saw some issues in Iowa of getting accuracy on votes. Is that a drawback here in our state?
We feel confident that what happened this week is not going to happen on February 22nd here in Nevada. We started our planning earlier than ever for our caucus. We have had staff on the ground organizing from day one to set up, to train, engage our volunteers. We have a number of redundancies and backups that we're evaluating at the moment and are working to pick the best path forward to make sure that every Nevadan's voice is heard on the 22nd.
Sure. Tech has been a major issue with the caucus in Iowa. Do we have an update on kind of where we're going on the tech side of our caucus?
Like I said, we have a number of backups and redundancies in place. We are taking the time. We are being thoughtful and methodical about what our options are. We're considering every single option to make sure that caucus day is successful and folks can make their voice heard on the 22nd.
Megan, you were in Iowa. Pros and cons, what did you see there with being boots on the ground?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at a caucus site. There were 680 people there. It was a packed room. The process took a while, but it otherwise ran smoothly. They were able to get everyone counted in the span of a couple of hours, despite there being so many people, and get the whole realignment process done. It can be complicated. So that part of it ran smoothly. Where we ran into problems, obviously, we saw with this app on the back end having this coding error that led to all the data was reported correctly. People were inputting the numbers. The system had the information correct, but it was reporting those numbers out incorrectly to the Iowa Democratic Party, and that's where we saw, they took a step back, didn't release those results, took time to go through and vet, go through their paper trail and try to verify those results before releasing it. So, it's a trade-off, right? The caucus process is always a trade-off. You have people, volunteers, your dedicated party loyalists running the process as opposed to, employed election officials. So, it's just two different ways of doing things. It's a, way of doing it for party building versus, having a government-run election. And I think you have some trade-offs, when you choose between the two.
And one of those trade-offs, of course, is cost and then who's actually paying for this.
Mm-hmm.
Alana, let's talk about just the Nevada Dems. First off, who actually fits the bill for a caucus?
The Nevada State Democratic Party, the caucus on February 22nd?
Yes.
Yeah, that is an organized and run by the state party.
Gotcha. And so if we were to have a primary, would that also be paid through the party, or would that be paid through the state?
I can't speculate on a primary or what the process would look like. For us, our number one priority is having a successful caucus on the 22nd.
Yeah. Do we know how much a caucus costs?
Caucuses are an investment in our ground game, right? And Andrew mentioned, thinking about the general election and the planning there. Our caucus is the first step in organizing ourselves for the general election. We have staff on the ground who are assigned to every single county in the state that have been engaging, recruiting, and training volunteers. We have same-day voter registration, where we have already seen, coming out of 2018, incredible growth in our voter registration numbers, especially in Clark County. All of this is a building block for us to have the organization, the infrastructure that you saw in 2016 and 2018 to deliver and continue to grow so that we win in November.
Andrew, let's talk a little bit more about costs from the Republican side. Did that go into the decision-making at all not to have a caucus this year?
That was never really a consideration. One of the things that we do is we budget for it anyways, but we've diverted those funds into party building. I mean, we know that it is a fixed cost for us every single election cycle, and this is one of those things that we were able to reappropriate those funds into other things that we think are going to be more important going forward.
Gotcha. Megan, let's talk a little bit more just about the process itself. Now, you've been tracking kind of where the Nevada Dems are and what some of the changes have been from 2016 to 2020. What are some of the key changes you've seen and what the caucus process is going to be here?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest change, obviously, this time around, like Alana mentioned, is the addition of early voting. That has not existed in the past. Historically, you'd have to show up on a Saturday at noon, spend a couple hours to caucus. Not everyone is able to do that. They might have work. In the past, the party has had these at-large precinct sites on the Strip to allow hotel workers to caucus. But, other folks have other jobs, too. You need childcare. There are other barriers to access. And that was something we heard mentioned a lot in Iowa, where they had these satellite caucus locations on caucus day, but they didn't have early voting. And so that is one of the main changes this year, is that folks are going to be able to participate. They are going to be able to weigh in for that 4-day period from February 15th to 18th. And you can go to, a local community center. You have lots of options about where you want to go, and that's going to be a lot easier for folks to be able to have that flexibility. So that's the most significant change, I think, this year.
Alana, walk us through the process then from February 15th to 18th. I'm going to caucus. What exactly can I expect on those days?
Right. So on February 15th, early voting begins. We're offering over 80 early voting sites across the state. That also includes back-of-house sites at some of our key locations on the Las Vegas Strip. This is going to be an easy process where you can show up, check in, select your preference, and then leave. That will go through the 18th. You can find your early voting site and your caucus location, your caucus day location now at caucus.mvdems.com. Fast forward to the 22nd. This is going to look more like the traditional process that folks have participated in previously. We are still providing locations on the Las Vegas Strip, and then we also have over 250 locations across the state. These are precinct caucus locations where you have to attend your precinct's caucus, whereas during early vote, it's easy because you get to go to any location in your county. And that process will run as people have done it before, where we have a precinct chair who runs the process, and then people break out into their preference groups.
And we'll talk a little bit more specifically about the caucus day process, but one question I have is, not the best at math, but 80 to 250 from early caucus to then caucus day. The process is obviously taking the early caucus votes, and those become part of the caucus day votes. Capacity-wise, especially if we're not using the application of technology, do we have a good system to make sure that we're getting all of those pre-seed votes to the right precinct?
Yeah, and the reason why we opened this process up so much is because our North Star, our commitment is to have the most expansive, transparent, and accessible caucus yet. We are going to stick with the early voting process. We have done robust training for our caucus. We've held hundreds of trainings across the state. Those started many, many months ago. We have an organizing team on the ground that have recruited over 2,000 volunteers to date just to help run our caucus and make sure that it runs smoothly.
We have any idea percentage-wise of how many registered voters that we are expecting to actually take advantage of their early voting?
I think we can see that the voter registration numbers for Democrats is growing every single day. This is an opportunity for us to, by offering same-day voter registration, to include voters who are excited about this nominating process to join our team and be on our team through the caucus and through Election Day to support Democrats.
Megan, do you have any idea, have you done any research on that, and do we have any projections on what kind of percentage we might see here?
I think the interesting thing that I've been taking a lot of look at as I think about what turnout might be, early voting is by far the most popular method of general election voting here, right? Nevadans like voting early, they're familiar with the process. So I think we'll see as people learn about and understand that there's an early voting option, I think a lot of people probably are going to choose that just because we know that a lot of people tend to choose that for regular elections anyways. So I don't think while, we can put a firm number on it, I don't think, anyone can guess how something that's happening for the first time is going to go. We know that Nevadans like early voting, and I think we'll probably see that come through on election or on caucus day.
And back to the process itself. When we vote, we have curtains, right, where it's a private thing. That's obviously not the case on caucus day. We have a more inclusive process. What happens in early voting then? Are you voting amongst your constituents, or are you voting in kind of more of a private selection?
Right. Yeah, and you're right. That's caucus day is fun. I mean, you're in a room with your neighbors, with people who are in your precinct, and casting. And showing your preference for your candidate. Early voting will feel very similar to how you would participate during early voting in a regular election. We obviously will have volunteers there, and we have rules around who can be in the site and what that looks like. But the goal of the early voting process is to provide an option and make this easy for Nevadans to make their voice be heard, especially in Clark County. We know people are working different hours, working many jobs. So it's a primary for us to provide that accessibility for voters.
For sure. Andrew, the pre-election side of this, it's more like a primary, but it's not necessarily a primary. Do you think it's the right direction to go for a caucus?
I think so. The biggest advantage that we have now is that we're able to dedicate a lot more time and resources to our down ballot races, right? We want to make sure that we're helping every single incumbent protect their seat and make sure that they're building out the best operations possible, and we're able to support them in whatever ways we can.
Well, we talked a lot about practice, and one of the ways that the Nevada Dems are practicing is by doing mock caucuses, and Nevada Week had the opportunity to go check out a mock caucus. Let's take a look at that.
Before any official business is conducted at the caucus.
In just a few days, almost every person in this room will caucus for their favorite presidential candidate.
Catcher in the Rye by Katie Salinger.
But today, they're caucusing for their favorite banned books.
This is the #1 book here.
Clark County and Nevada Democrats co-hosted this mock caucus at Sierra Vista High School to teach voters of all ages how to participate on February 22nd.
This is for everyone. Anyone who's going to be attending a caucus, anyone who's leading a caucus.
As a caucus site lead, Yasmin Kaboud has attended several of these mock caucuses in preparation.
As a site lead, I will be coordinating all of the precincts within my site. I signed up for that responsibility because it's really important that these caucuses go well.
Most of the mock caucusers in this room won't be site leads. Instead, they're curious voters who just want to learn more about the caucus process.
This is my first time caucusing. I mean, of course, I voted before. I was active, in politics back in Ohio, but this is my first time caucusing, so it's a whole new world.
Despite some of the growing pains, the room eventually got the hang of it. After 2 rounds, To Kill a Mockingbird won the most delegates with 25 votes. So To Kill a Mockingbird, right, of all books. Alana, let's talk about this. I mean, walk us through the actual process here. What we actually saw there in a mock caucus, is that what a citizen, a Democratic voter could expect here?
Yeah, that's right. And the value of a mock caucus is it's like doing a dress rehearsal before the play. The mock caucus is a way for us to practice, and it's similar to what it will look like on caucus day. You will show up in your precinct room. Your precinct chair will begin the caucus, and then you'll break out into your preference groups. From there, then we'll determine what the viability threshold is in that precinct room. That varies.
What is that threshold? Does it change?
And that varies by precinct. For most precincts, it's 15%. Once that's determined, people will break out into their groups, and from there, candidates will be viable or not viable. If your candidate is not viable, then you need to move to another group. And then from there, we go into our final alignment. And then after that, we would award delegates.
So where does the early election process of this come into? I'm assuming it's that first round of votes then, is that correct?
Yep, exactly. So when we determine what the viability threshold is, we'll use the early voting numbers, tie that back to their home precinct, and use that to determine the total attendance to then determine the viability, and then use those preferences from the early voting process and include that when we break out into our preference groups in the room.
Now, on caucus day, you then break in, have the potential to then move to another group. You don't have that, of course, in early caucus because you're not there. But is early caucus, are there multiple choices that you get to make, or how do you address that part of it?
Yep, exactly. So there are going to be multiple preference options in the early voting process. And that allows individuals to pick more than one candidate. Just like when you're in the room on caucus day, you're able to pick your first and second choice.
Gotcha. Andrew, the Republican process is a little bit different than this. Obviously, we're not doing a caucus in 2020, but we did in 2016. Can you kind of walk us through what the Republican process has been here in Nevada?
So we're still holding a precinct meeting. We're still setting up our delegates, and now what we're looking to do is start to select delegates to send to the national convention. It's pretty straightforward at this point, right? We're going to send a delegation that ultimately is going to be carrying the preference of Nevadans, and it's fair to say that we know where that's going.
Well, formally, we haven't announced that. At what point or what day does the Republican Party in Nevada actually announce their presidential candidate then?
We'll be doing that at the state caucus meeting.
And when is that?
It's early May.
Early May. 2016, though. We're talking about the process here is on the Democratic side of what a caucus is. 2016, was it a similar process to this?
No, we had a more traditional process, right? Very much engaged in the traditional activities of go ahead and pick your nominee. But one of the things that we've started to notice is that we have all this enthusiasm, and rather than say, great, we're going to put up roadblocks where you're going to go through the formalities and walk through these really redundant steps, we want to make sure that we're connecting voters to their local assemblymen, their local state senators. We're really focusing on building out what our Republican bench looks like in Southern Nevada. So we're trying to make sure that we are funneling all this enthusiasm into your local Republican candidates.
Democratic side, are we doing the same thing?
Well, we in 2012 did hold a caucus when President Obama was in office. I think the missed opportunity for the GOP here in the state by not holding a caucus is the organizing opportunity. Our process was not a couple hundred people making a choice, but it was opening up the process for Nevadans to come in and show their support with their neighbors, that they were standing with President Obama at the time, and also to register same day to continue to grow that capacity. I think that was helpful in us winning in 2012 in November.
Megan, I want to come back to you and talk more about Iowa specifically. One of the things that we've talked a little bit about is the time commitment here. Now, you mentioned there were over 600 voters at the caucus site that you were at. Can you give us an idea? I mean, for one thing, how long is the caucus process that you were witnessing there?
Yeah, so the caucus in Iowa was called to order at around 7 p.m. Or actually, the doors closed at 7 p.m. It took some time for everyone to finally file in. Everything was wrapped up by about 9:30 or 10. That's when they had reached the point where they were selecting delegates and had actually, figured out what the totals were going to be, had done their final alignment. So, it's a process that takes a couple of hours. Again, that's going to depend a lot on how many people you have in the room. If you have, a small caucus of 20 people, it's going to be a lot easier to count 20 people than it is to count 680. So I think there's a lot of variance too in terms of just how many bodies are in the room and just trying to organize a large mass of people.
And very dependent on the number, and I guess, and how many times you actually have to cut down the number of candidates that you have. Alana, if we can look back at maybe 2016, 2012, how long was the average caucus here in our state?
I think it varies by site. We have small precincts. We have some precincts that have no registered Democrats in them, and then we have some precincts that are more robust in terms of the number of Democrats who are going to be there. It varies by site, and so we want to allow the flexibility for sites to finish their process when they are done with it.
Yep. We just have a couple minutes left. I want to go around the table. Talked about a lot here. Andrew, I want to start with you. Biggest takeaway, Republican side or Democratic side, about the caucus process itself. What do you want the viewers to know?
reach out to your local Republican Party. The biggest thing that we've done as far as organizing and how we move forward is really starting to unite these independent groups that have been doing their own thing, right? In the past, we've seen campaigns function in the place of your local party. That's not the case anymore, right? We're starting to move forward in a direction where this base level infrastructure that had not been provided is all of a sudden there for candidates, and we're trying to make sure that their platform is amplified as best as possible. So reach out to your local Republican Party. We're more than happy to sit down and introduce you to the process.
And Alana, biggest takeaway?
Yeah, NV Dems are ready. We're confident and ready to have a successful caucus on February 22nd. We're offering early voting February 15th through the 18th, caucus day on February 22nd. Go to caucus.nvdems.com to find your location and learn more about the process.
More resources. And really quickly, Megan, biggest takeaway for you?
I would say just get informed, right? I'm a journalist. Do your research, whether you're Republican, Democrat, figure out how to get involved in your party's process and, read up on all the candidates.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation. It was great. For more information about the caucus, please visit our website, vegaspbs.org/Nevada-Week. You can also find us always on social media at Nevada Week. Thank you so much.